All right, so get this. Picture the Georgia's State of the State address. Governor's about to speak, right?
Right.
And you have a state senator, like, literally getting into it with troopers at the door trying to get into the chamber.
Oh, wow. That's intense. What's the story there?
Well, that's what we are diving into today.
Okay.
We've got this Fox News article that breaks down this whole wild scene and, like, all the backstory. And, well, it is a lot.
Yeah, I can imagine a scene like that just like raises so many questions. Like, what led to this? Like,
Right.
what are the implications for, freedom of speech,
Exactly.
political dissent, and all of that?
And this isn't just some random outburst. The senator involved, Colton Moore.
Okay.
He has a history of challenging authority.
Right.
He's very pro-Trump, very outspoken.
Oh, yeah, I think I've heard that name before.
Yeah.
He's been in the news a bit.
Yeah, so let's give our listener a little bit of context here. Who exactly is Colton Moore, and what led to this whole, like, ban from the Georgia House chamber thing?
So Colton Moore is a Georgia state senator, and he's known for being very, vocal, shall we say, about his beliefs.
Right.
So, for example, he was a leading voice calling for the impeachment of Fani Willis, the DA who led that indictment against Trump.
Right, for the alleged election interference in Georgia.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
And that case, ultimately fell apart because of a conflict of interest, which I'm sure just, added fuel to the fire for Colton Moore.
Yeah. And this tendency to kind of challenge those in power is key to understanding why he was banned from the House chamber in the first place.
Okay.
It stems from an earlier incident where he publicly criticized a resolution to name a building after the late House Speaker David Ralston.
So this wasn't his first disagreement with the leadership.
Oh, not at all. And Moore considered Ralston, corrupt, and he didn't hold back in voicing his opposition. And that ultimately led to the ban, which is a pretty, significant move.
It is. It really raises the question of, where's the line, when it comes to, dissenting voices in a legislative body? Is it really fair to just silence someone because they disagree with the majority?
Yeah, that's a really complex question.
Yeah.
And this case really highlights that tension, right? On the one hand, you need some level of order, some decorum to actually run these things effectively.
Right.
But then on the other hand, if you're silencing opposing viewpoints, where does that lead? Can it feel like a very slippery slope?
Totally. And it's especially concerning when you think about, the context of Moore's attempt to enter the chamber.
Right.
This wasn't just a regular session. This was, a joint session of the General Assembly for the state of the state.
A big deal.
Huge deal.
Yeah.
And Moore, firmly believes that, the ban against him shouldn't apply in this context. He even wrote a letter to the current House Speaker, John Burns, basically saying, look, it's my constitutional right to be here.
He felt pretty strongly about that.
It sounds like it, yeah.
Yeah.
And he was trying to do it the proper channels, but also he was taking his case to the public, right? He was on, X, formerly Twitter, vowing to, quote, always speak the truth.
So it sounds like he was determined to be heard.
Determined to be heard, yeah.
One way or another.
One way or another. So let's talk about that confrontation.
Okay.
What happened at the door?
Well, despite his letter, despite his public statements, when Moore showed up, he was met with resistance. The doorman basically blocked the entrance, wouldn't let him in.
And knowing Moore, I'm guessing he didn't take that very well.
No, he did not. Things escalated quite quickly. He got into it with state troopers, citing his constitutional rights, saying, look, the House rules don't apply here. This is a joint session.
Right.
And he even told them point blank, and this is a direct quote, your House rules do not apply. I'm going into the chamber.
Wow. So he was really ready to stand his ground.
Yeah. And this is where the video footage, becomes really important to see what happens next.
Okay.
It shows a scuffle breaks out, and a doorman appears to push Moore to the floor. And then suddenly, he's surrounded by state troopers, and they're arresting him.
Wow.
It's a wild scene.
Wild scene. And it's all on video.
Yep.
So that's not where the story ends, right?
Oh, no. No, it doesn't. Not at all.
It's crazy, right? You see it happening. It's right there on video.
It is.
But the story keeps going.
It does. Even as they're taking him away, in handcuffs, Moore's yelling about authoritarians trying to silence him.
Really?
Yeah. It's a dramatic moment, and it really shows you how Moore sees this whole thing,
It's really, it really makes you think about that balance of power.
Yeah.
You've got this elected official, prevented from basically participating in this like key event.
Exactly. And I mean, this didn't happen in a vacuum, right? The reaction has been pretty intense.
Oh, I bet. Especially from, within his own party.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, Josh McCoon, he's the Georgia Republican chairman.
Okay.
He came out, expressing shock and disappointment, called it legally and morally wrong to keep Moore out.
Really? So, like, not just disagreeing with how it was handled, but, like, that it was wrong, period.
Right. And that's a big statement coming from, the head of the state GOP.
Yeah.
It suggests this whole thing is kind of, touched a nerve, maybe even revealed some deeper divisions within the party itself.
It's like this whole thing has just, become this lightning rod for all these bigger questions about freedom of speech and dissent, and just like, where is the limit of authority?
Totally. And it's especially interesting when you consider, like, Moore's past attempt to impeach DA Willis. Remember that case against Trump fell apart because of a conflict of interest, which, I mean, you got to think that just strengthened Moore's belief that he's up against this, like, rigged system.
Right. That's like working against him and his allies.
Yeah.
It definitely seems like there's this pattern of challenging authority, right?
Yeah.
Where's the line?
Exactly.
When does challenging authority become obstruction or even abuse of power?
It's a tough one.
Yeah.
And this case really kind of brings those nuances to light. Like, you want your elected officials to hold each other accountable and speak out against corruption.
Right.
But how far can they go before it starts to actually undermine the institutions they're a part of, right?
Yeah. It's such a, like, delicate balance. But let's not forget, like, the real core issue here, which is freedom of speech.
Right.
Whether or not you agree with Moore, his arrest raises some serious questions about the right to dissent, especially in, a legislative body.
Absolutely. Moore's argument is that free speech, like, that's how you keep those in power accountable.
Right.
It's part of his job.
Like, fundamental to his role.
Right.
Yeah. And, some might say, okay, but there are proper channels, but Moore felt like those channels were being, like, closed off to him.
And I think it's really important to consider, like, what happens if you silence those dissenting voices?
Yeah.
Even if you disagree with them. Like, does it create an atmosphere of fear?
Yeah.
Does it stifle open debate?
Right.
Does it lead to more polarization?
Yeah.
More mistrust?
Or even, could it even make the problem worse?
Yeah.
If people are afraid to speak up, doesn't that just let those in power operate with, like, even less accountability?
That's a chilling thought. It really is something we need to think about. And this whole thing in Georgia, it's a reminder that free speech, accountability, they're constantly being tested.
Yeah.
Even in, well-established democracies like ours.
So for our listener, someone out there might be thinking, okay, this is interesting, but what does it have to do with me?
Right. Well, I think this whole situation, it challenges us to think about how we balance these different priorities. You know?
Yeah.
Maintaining order, but also making sure different viewpoints can be heard.
Right, without censorship or fear of punishment.
Exactly. It's about finding that sweet spot, that balance between protecting our institutions, and making sure individuals can speak their minds.
Because, I mean, at the end of the day, whether it's a state senator in Georgia or someone, posting online, those principles of free speech, accountability, that's what makes democracy work.
Right. And this case, as crazy and controversial as it is, it really shows us where our political discourse is at today. It forces us to ask those tough questions about, like, where do we draw the line?
Yeah.
How do we handle dissent? What kind of society do we want to live in?
Makes you think, huh? It really does.
It does.
This whole Colton Moore thing, it's like a tiny version of this big debate we're having, about free speech and what it even means to hold, powerful people accountable.
Yeah, it's like, how do we have these open conversations?
Yeah.
How do we actually talk to each other?
Right.
Without turning into, chaos.
Yeah.
But also without silencing people who think differently.
Right. And it's hard. It's hard, especially now when everything feels so divided,
It does.
But that's why these stories are important.
Yeah.
They make us deal with the hard questions.
They make us look in the mirror.
Right.
And say, okay, how do we want this to work?
How do we want our democracy to work?
What do we actually believe in?
Yeah.
And how do we stick to those beliefs when it gets tough?
And we've covered a lot today, from the arrest itself and everyone freaking out about it to these bigger ideas about, like, can we even talk to each other anymore?
Yeah. And maybe there's not, like, easy answers.
Right.
But I think the big thing here is to stay involved.
Yeah.
Stay informed and be willing to question your own assumptions,
Because if we just sit back and let things happen, that's when we get in trouble.
That's when we lose those freedoms.
Yeah.
The things that make democracy work.
So to our listener out there, think about this. What does this whole thing tell us about where we are right now?
Yeah.
Politically, I mean.
When is it right to push back?
Right.
To challenge authority?
Yeah.
And what happens when you do?
What are the risks? It's a question worth thinking about.
Yeah.
Maybe, read a little more about Colton Moore. See what's going on in Georgia.
Yeah. Or even just, like, talk to someone who sees things differently than you. Right. Because that's how we learn.
Right.
That's how we grow. That's how we become, better citizens.
That's how we make democracy work. So thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Yeah, thanks for listening.
It's been a journey.
It has.
And we hope you learned something.
We hope you enjoyed it.
Until next time, keep those minds curious.
Keep asking those questions.
And keep those conversations going.